All right, well, it's just about that time, so we are gonna get started here. Just wanted to let everyone know at the top that we are recording the session and we'll be sending out a recording to everyone who signed up for the webinar, as well as the slides associated with the webinar afterwards. So no worries, no need to take notes there. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session, Scaling Agile Essential Practices and Tooling to Deliver Results. I'm John Blevins with Targetprocess, and I'll be moderating the webinar today. We've got two excellent speakers for today's webinar. First, presenting will be Rune Christensen, a senior consultant from Scaled Agile. Rune is a certified SAFe program consultant, and he will share his in-depth knowledge of the SAFe platform, focusing on the best strategies for scaling Agile with SAFe. He'll be joined by Mark Debian from Targetprocess. Mark is a SAFe program consultant. He's implemented DevOps and Scaled Agile frameworks at some of the largest manufacturing, insurance, and healthcare companies in the world. At Targetprocess, Mark works as a senior solutions engineer and consultant. By the end of the webinar, you should be able to provide alignment on vision and company-wide goals, organize your team's PI planning around value, benefit with OKR dashboards, align portfolio roadmap and lean budgeting, conduct impactful retrospectives to collect feedback, measure and monitor your continuous delivery pipeline.
So I just want to check that you can hear me.
Yes, can hear you. Can hear you, Rune.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Yep, and just real quick, before we start, we are going to be accepting questions during the webinar. So if you do have any questions, we'll be taking them at the end, and you can put those right into GoToWebinar. And we've got folks on the back end at taking those. But with that, Rune, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me in the first place. So I always have this interesting things when I work with Agile. I always have this principle, tools, how do I go about doing that? Been working as both Scrum Master and RTE. I have this dual relationship to tools, and I always try to go back and look at the principles and what to tell us about the tool. So I'm going to start out there. So talking about agility, I always go back to the HR Manifesto, and it kind of underlines it in the very first sentence of the values that we have individuals and interactions over processes and tools. So that's being all well, but you need to look at how this could be interpreted. And I like to think of it like the individuals and actions over processes and tools. That's a way that tools doesn't get in the way of the humans' interactions, but actually try to support or extend them, really. So when we have an organization that is suddenly distributed, or in these days for some entirely remote, then the lack of a cohesive tool chain, that can actually get in the way of us interacting, because we spend all of our times trying to use various tools across teams, across arts, across the portfolio, and that can end up with a lot of bureaucracy instead. So instead of spending time on that, I would rather focus on the individuals and how can we balance this, really. So I think that's some of the things we need to look at. If you go a bit deeper into the manifesto, then you can look at the principles. So I try to look at that and have a look at number 10, one of my absolute favorites principles: simplicity, the art of maximizing the work not done is essential. So whereas I always track this back to product management, I can see how this can be useful from a tool perspective as well. How we don't want to have too much delay in handing over work between the various tools. We don't want to do context switching. We don't want to focus on incompatibilities between the tools. We really just want to focus on our work and our interactions, whereas all the things in the background flow. So that's how I like to look at it from the Agile perspective. Now, going from let's say from the topmost level within SAFe, our portfolio, where we're really trying to focus on the really big things, the flow of epics through, we actually have quite a lot of data points that we could utilize in the way we work today. So when we think of it from a lean governance perspective, well, we need to help with our program execution. We need to look at our very large initiatives, the epics, and how they flow through our system. And lean governance really need to look at the manage of the spending as well. They need to be transparent about the work that they do, so we can better do decentralizing of decision making down to the teams. And we need transparency in order to do that. We need to look at our strategic implementation through the strategic themes. We need to look at the improvements we can do on the process, so we can always improve. So there's plenty of data points that we, from a portfolio perspective, really should be looking at. And just by looking at it, and we also need to consider all the traceability. So we're coming from our enterprise with a strategy that's been formulated, and already here we meet the first part, where we have the strategic formulation, we have our strategic themes that we now need to look at. And these are important because they impact pretty much all of the work we do in the portfolio, our portfolio vision, how we keep track of that. Our investment horizons is something that we look at here. How are we funding? How are we monitoring our value streams? What about our portfolio campaign? We need to look at the flow here. So there's plenty of things to dig into. And just one of the things that was recently, well, maybe not so recently introduced into the framework is the OKRs, the objectives and key results that we're using together with or as the strategic themes really. So these are some data points as well that we need to keep track of, and whereas you can do it in a spreadsheet, we want to have a cohesive way of doing it. And they're influencing our investment horizons. They want us to help see where are we putting our money, where are we putting our funding. We want to be able to see whether the guardrails we set up is actually being supported by the way we execute. Are we putting enough innovations into our Horizon 3? Are we investing in Horizon 0 to decommission some of this work we're already doing? So again, another thing to monitor. And then our roadmaps that are being aggregated from our arts, from our solution trains into solution roadmaps, into our portfolio roadmaps. I mean, keeping track of this on a piece of paper is okay, but when you work in large distributed environments, you need to be able to be transparent about this as well. Otherwise, we really can't align our work. And as we execute, we have our metrics we need to keep track of as well. How we are progressing towards our OKRs, using our PI objectives, how's our funding going. So again, looking at the sheer number of data points, and if you want to use this to some kind of planning purposes as well, we need to keep track of them. And at last, of course, there's the portfolio campaign with the epics. How many do we have? What's our work in progress limits? How are we ensuring flow? Are we using cumulative flow diagram for this? I mean, again, yet another set of things that we need to be transparent about to be able to work properly and in an agile fashion. So I'd like to see how we support some of these things, Mark. So over to you.
Great, thanks, Rune, and thank you again for the introduction and for the portfolio overview. For those of you that are on the call, first I want to encourage you to ask questions again if you have any questions along the way. And second, just to really describe what we're going to be doing here, Rune and I are going to be doing a little bit of a back and forth. So he's going to introduce some of these concepts, and then I'm going to show you how that can actually be materialized inside of Targetprocess. So I'll be doing the live demo portion of this. What we're looking at here is just a picture of what would be a setup for a PI planning session. But in these days and age, and certainly with global teams, doing this remotely is something that I think is becoming more of our reality, using tools like GoToMeeting and Zoom, and then being able to aggregate, not just at a team level, which I think with the manifesto really addressed well, but how does that scale up to hundreds or thousands of different team members? So I'm going to be walking through an example here in Targetprocess. If you're not familiar with the tool, we have views on the left-hand side here that we'll be able to use, and I'll be walking through those views. Those are set for the different levels that we're going to be walking through. If I wanted to create new views, or if I wanted to create new dashboards or reports, I can do that over here on the left-hand side. So the first thing I wanted to look at for this organization that I have in this instance here is how are we looking at that data? So here I've got my value streams that we're having at the highest levels, and we can break that work down into my release trains from a value stream perspective. I can also organize this, as Rune was mentioning, into solution trains. So I've got my big solution train of banking, and I can then have different types of the banking solutions underneath there. And then when I break that further down, I can actually see and start to track the detailed teams that are rolling up into those various different solutions. This is just the start of the setup. But this really allows me then to make sure that I'm organizing that work correctly for the way the teams are going to be doing their work. When we do want to organize this into those big goals or those strategic themes, we can use a strategic theme where we have OKRs as well incorporated into our solution. So what we do is we set the big goal, the big strategic theme for this, in this case, increasing customer satisfaction. And then we have our key results underneath there that are going to let me measure and track specific SMART goals, hopefully, that will then tell me if I'm going to be able to go ahead and achieve this specific strategic theme. By using types of reporting like maybe a bar chart, I can actually check. I can check to see am I on schedule? Am I not quite at 50%, or am I doing really well on that strategic theme? So we can track the data that we're collecting at a lower level, at the team levels, and really roll that up after we do our planning and make sure that we're tracking the details there. From an agility standpoint, we can use agility health metrics and different radars to track, are our teams even ready for this? Are they at the right level? And are they able to start executing on that work in a agile fashion? So whether it be business agility, lean agile leadership, any of the other great metrics that you can grab off of the Scaled Agile website, we can use those and incorporate those into here and even plot those data points inside of our solution using containers and measurements and be able to track that along the way and see how well we're doing from an agility standpoint. When we look at getting ready for a PI planning event, we could use our portfolio canvases to see the details there. And then we want to take those value streams and we want to start to align them into our funding models. So here I've got my my different value stream budgeting that we're working on here on the left-hand side and seeing how well we're doing to track to those budgets. We can check our allocated budgets to our cost and track how well we're doing allocations to cost. And then even look at it maybe year over year and track how well we've been doing quarter over quarter or year over year and really manage that at a high level. This is going to help us going forward to say, are we on track to hit our budget numbers, and are we on track to hit those horizontal budget guardrails? As we look at our costing, we can then go into our costing models and see, are we hitting the mark in terms of our strategic themes costs? So this shows me over time, how well have we done in terms of the cost for the various different strategic themes that we're budgeting on. Looks like this one had a big spike up. Maybe this is for remote planning, so we can up the cost for our remote planning, but there's a reason why we can look at those. And then we can also look at the value that we've delivered on those to tell us whether or not we're on track to do that. Planning the work out here from the portfolio level down into from a strategy level into our portfolio epics. We can then take those epics and those features and plan them on this roadmap. So I can look at those cost numbers and we can actually overlay them onto this roadmap, and I can see where I'm starting, where am I finishing, and am I on track in terms of looking at my 1 year plan, my 2 year plan, or even when I drill down into my PI. Am I on track on this roadmap to hit the detailed goals that we've set for our organization, or are we overstretched here? We can see where we've gone past our forecast number. And then we want to make sure that we're managing that flow and watching the flow of that. So as I look at my portfolio Kanban view, again, this is another example of not just a roadmap, but the Kanban. We're watching that flow, managing the WIP of these epics as they move through this flow, and even tracking things like dependencies or any other data points that we want to put on these. In Targetprocess, any of our board views can very easily be added to in terms of adding additional details on here. It's very easy to customize these cards and make them whatever you need to make sure that you can deliver at the portfolio planning level what your organization wants. So now to talk a little bit more about how do we do some of that detailed planning and drill a little bit further down in, I'll go ahead and switch it back over to Rune, and we'll continue on.
Thank you, Mark. So I really like to have that that detailed level. You see, I get asked quite often about how do we track that to that level, our investments and across the different value streams. I think it gives a great overview. So now I'll step into something that at least that's something we get asked about a lot and that people are really focused upon, especially in these times. And that's about our essential planning, our PI planning, and what leads up to it. So at Scaled Agile, we have our big analog planning board. We have our Kanban system there. We have our overview and everything. And quite frankly, I kind of like it. But in a situation where suddenly you are 7,500 kilometers away from the headquarters, you are 8 hours time difference away, and you don't have an overview anymore, then you start to miss these tools having some insights into it. So it's not necessarily that one replaces the other, but they can actually supplement each other quite efficiently. So one of the first things I always think about is, again, back to my RTE days, how can I get an overview of all the things that's going on the program level? What are the features that are coming in? How many do I have? Do I have flow in my system? That was really one of my key responsibilities, to ensure that we have this proper flow going through. And whereas you can easily track this on an analog board, getting all the data points in to see, do I have any bottlenecks anywhere? Do I need to change my WIP limits? Do I need to allocate some more teams to my value stream, so on and so forth? You really need to have that data being pulled out. Also, we're going to show that in just a little moment here, is the weighted shortage of first. If you need to keep track of all of the different parameters in that, you need to recalculate them as you go along. You need a place to do that as well. You could still do it in a separate tool, but again, having the cohesive way to do it in a connected tool chain just makes it all the more efficient. So again, talking about weighted shortage of first, we want to be able to track our user business value, maybe our time criticality that changes the last PI. Maybe we have new risks that we could focus on removing, or new opportunities really. So the weighted shortage of first and the cost of delay parameters, it's not something that stays static. It's something that you continuously update, and a tool will certainly help you to do that. And then of course there's the big PI planning events that all of us go to. Have been to quite a few, remote one so far, and the tools just help it go smoother. It just helps the team focus on what they need to do, talk together, collaborate, and such, and then focus on the output we want to get. We want to be sure that we have some objectives that are somewhat aligned with our strategic themes. We want to have our program board with all the dependencies in there as well. And then of course, going into the team level, we have all of our team iterations that need to be taken care of. We have our stories. We have several different types of enablers to put in there. We need to track our capacity, our load. We have the risk at the team level. We have risk at the program level. And when you're working in large arts or solution train for such, you need a way to easily aggregate all of these together from the Scrum Masters, from the teams, into the RTE. And then, of course, in the end, we need to be able to look at our committed and uncommitted objectives, so that we, in the end, can create our high-level plan, our program board with all of our features in there. And what tools really help here is with some of the working agreements that we have. Who's allowed to put a feature here? Who's allowed to put a dependency up there? Is that only one team, or is it everybody who could do it? How do we connect it? So all this visualization here, when you're working remote or distributed, really helps the team focus and moving forward. And of course, you need to aggregate all the risks. You need to roam them. You need to be able to collect them in an easy way, so that you, in the end, after you have reviewed the entire plan, you looked at your objectives, you looked at your risks, looked at anything that's standing in your way, you can do your confidence vote. So confidence vote is really powerful thing, and I still love to seeing all people's hands going up. But when you're in a remote setting, you want to have that replicated in some way, and you can use the chat function for that in some tools, but it's not going to give you the proper overview. So having a good and lean way to do that is certainly efficient as well. So Mark, maybe you can help with showing how some of these things will work in Targetprocess.
Absolutely, thank you. Let me go ahead and go back into Targetprocess again. So, what I've done now is I've actually come down into my essential planning folder here. These are views that I've set up for myself, really to help me to look at the details. There are a lot of other views that you can add, and when this gets installed out of the box, I'll just show you just a quick list of some of the other ones that I have here. So there's a lot of different views that we can look at, but as I'm looking at how do I do my essential planning, I'm going to start at that Kanban level. So this happens to be my program Kanban board, and we can set our WIP limits right in here. This can be on a wall, but I think as we're looking at a remote team, I like this because you can select and edit multiple at one time. I can drag multiple over here into a specific board. So When I did that, though, you can see I violated my WIP rules. So now I've got 6 out of 4 in here, and we're highlighting that now as red. You can force things like comments to be required as you move something into a certain state, and even then manage and see who's doing that and track all of the history of that. When we do this, though, when we start this flow, we're actually measuring and looking at our lead time and our cycle time as well. So we can start to measure how long did it take us to get from analyzing to, say, implementing, and we can track the details there on the Kanban board. To drill a little bit further into that what if capabilities and our ability to do, say, weighted shortest job first, as I look at my feature funnel here, this is a list of all of my features. We obviously are going to start focusing on the top 10 or top 20 of the ones that we want to go ahead and do. But before we do that, maybe we'll start to put in some details. So I can put my business value scores right in here on this work. I can put a risk reduction score in there as well, and then have a time criticality as well. When I divide that by my job size here, we get our cost of delay and then our weighted shortest job first number here of 2.63. Then we can sort these and organize these in a way that we can decide if these are the features that we want to go ahead and add in. This is just an example of a calculated column that you can add. And if you want to change the calculation on some level, or maybe put some weighted numbers in there, it's possible for us to actually, you can put your own version of weighted shortest job first in there if you want to. But this weighted score is a good, beginning barometer or an indicator of what the teams are going to do. We also have some integrated what if scenario planning and some planning details that we can do. So as I look at the epics that were the features that we want to go ahead and plan into this specific program increment, we can actually decide if we want to go ahead and assign the work to those, and maybe assign teams to those into this PI. And when we do that, we can actually calculate a schedule. When I calculate a schedule, that's going to give me a what if plan to say this is what the forecast would look like if we go ahead and do these epics and deliver on these as part of this program increment. If we did that, I can actually apply this, and this will go ahead and add all of that work into the specific schedule. If I want to, I can also revert that back. But allowing me to take this work and the estimate that we have in them, and then do some what if capacity planning on this and some detailed work, allows me just to drill down further into the details of that to make sure that we have the right features planned and that we're going to be able to start on the right work at the right time. I'm just drilling into that capacity allocation a little bit more. We can start to plan out that work. We can plan it by the different types of work that we want to do. In this case, I can look at my enablers versus my business work versus my technical debt. We can set specific goals for those, and we can make sure that we stay within those specific goal numbers, and we can track whether or not we're going outside of those specific goal numbers. So as we're looking at how we want to plan out our business for the next quarter or two, we can start to look at that allocation and make sure that we're falling within those specific parameters. Once we have that, once we plan those top 10 features and we're ready to get moving, we'll look at that on a program board view. So the program board, again, has the teams on the left-hand side. We have our iterations across the top here, so we can track how well we're doing to the teams that are working on this work. The reason I like these boards so well is you can actually create different slices of boards that you want. This one happens to have the teams on the left-hand side and the iterations across the top. The different cards here are representing either features or stories or my dependencies where I have work. And if I want to create a new dependency, if I am one of those folks that we allow to go ahead and update the dependencies here, I'll go ahead and just add a new relation. And we can make a relation to this specific dependency here, and we'll call it a blocker. So I'll just add that blocker right in here, and we'll automatically create that string, which will allow me to see that we have dependent work that needs to start on July 14th. And then there's a dependency here that needs to get resolved by, say, August 10th. So we can actually track that and make sure that we know that if I don't get this feature done, there's no way that that dependency is going to get met as well. The other thing that we can do on these boards, and the reason I really like them as well, is you can zoom out and you can make bigger cards. You can put more detail on these cards. Or if you have a lot of these dependencies, we can zoom all the way out and see a very small view, and maybe even be able to see multiple teams or even multiple arts of work as we want to zoom out and zoom in on those various different program boards. Once we have our program board set and we know where those dependencies are, we can track our features on this roadmap. This is showing me the last PI, the current PI, and then the future PI. I can drag work from my backlog right onto here if I want to add more work to this. by simply dragging that work over and moving this specific feature into the future PI if we want to track it that way as well. There's multiple different ways we can add work into our program increment. But this is just a nice overall view of what's going on, and I can filter this dashboard for the details that I might want to see while I'm doing my essential planning. One of the things we do want to cover, I know, and Rune talked about it very well as well, is our ability to roam our risks. So here's an example of my risk board where I'm looking at what's resolved, what's owned, accepted, and mitigated on a board view. If I want to add a new risk into here, I would say don't go too long. And I'll go ahead and create a level for this. We have different types of risks. I can have a program risk or a team risk. We'll just call this a team risk, and I'll go ahead and add that to the board. So we haven't gone ahead and said this is going to be owned or mitigated, but I'm going to go ahead and own that one because I don't want to go too long in this part of my demonstration. And I'll finish up by saying, okay, this is our plan. We've got our risks assigned here. We know who's the owners of those risks. We'll finish up by doing our confidence vote. So in our solution, we've built right into this a confidence vote for our program increments. And we can also do a similar voting for things like story points and even whether or not we think that our retrospectives went well. So this happens to be where I would have the teams pull up this web page. They can do it on their mobile phone or on their tablet or on their computer. And then if we're remote, especially, this is great. So we can say, okay, we're going to vote on this. We'll go ahead and put our vote in. I think it was a 5. We can look at what everybody else voted as we look at the details here. So we'll expand down and we'll track all of our votes. So we can see who voted, and we can look at that confidence voting here. Once that vote has been applied and we've gone ahead and closed out the vote, we can actually track if we do multiple rounds of that. As I look at my program increment details page here, we can track how many people have voted and where were those votes. And then we can say whether or not we think we're ready to go forward. So this is just a great way to track that. And we can see those results over here on the right-hand side. It's showing us whether or not we've achieved the goals that we've expected to achieve and whether or not we're ready to move forward. And then with the team acceptance, we're ready to move on and do our team execution. So with that, I will hand it back over to Rune one more time, and we'll deep dive a little bit further into team execution.
Thank you, Mark. So there's so many things about the things you just showed that I really like. So simple thing like zooming in and out on the program board. So just having both the detailed and the simple overview, that really makes sense to me. But also the way you've done the confidence vote part, that you need, of course, to do it both on the team level. You need to do it on the art level as well. But you could also apply for different things. So that's something I enjoy. I've spent a lot of time working with the confidence vote when you're in a face-to-face setting that really requires that you have psychological safety working for you. And I've seen when you do it in a remote setting that it actually helps a bit with getting some of the say underlying problems forward if they can just do a lower vote, maybe put it in through text. So it's certainly helping it along a bit. I really like that. So we've done the PI planning. It's all done. We have the high-level plan ready. We want to get into the execution. We want to deliver our features. We want to work towards our objectives. We want to refine the backlogs and inspect our plan as we go along. So we start off with planning. It's probably one of the first events we do after the PI planning. And even though my team is sitting and covering the EMEA region, I mean, I'm sitting in Denmark. I have a couple of team members sitting in Germany. I have one sitting in the US and one sitting in the UK. So even within our regional team, we are distributed all over the world. So being able to do planning in a smart and efficient way, even on team level, is immensely important to us. So what are we talking about here? Well, we're also talking about our capacity, the capacity for the team, and some of the things you showed, Mark, I really like that, where you can look at capacity planning for the enablers, for the maintenance, and for the feature development, because you might get some guidelines during the PI planning for that. But how do you keep track of that? How do you come back after the PI is done and say, well, I spent X% of time doing feature development, and so you can actually start to measure it. So I really like that functionality. And you need to do your story analysis. You need to elaborate. You need to be able to split your stories. You need to be able to estimate your stories in a nice and efficient way. And then for those teams who really like to do that, the detailing of story or tasking as such can be quite efficient for some teams to do that. I see the mixed use of it, but certainly any tool you have should be able to support it, so the team, as a self-managing team, can be able to select that. And then again, just like we had our strategic themes, like we had our OKRs, like we had our PI objectives, we also need to have our iteration goals to get that 2-week progress moving forward, and the ability, of course, to link them up to the other higher level goals. And like you explained, Mark, we also want to use our commitment, our fist of 5 for the team level as well. And then, of course, during the iteration, but at least once it's over, you want to be able to retrospect over the status. So, of course, simple things like the burn-up chart, that's fairly manageable, and about your velocity, how much you planned, how much did you actually do. But when you're getting into for example, the cognitive flow diagram, so I tried to do this analog once, and was it worked for a couple of weeks. I actually stopped doing it because it was too much of a hassle. So having a tool supporting you, trying to help you find out where are your bottlenecks, how can it help you, and taking in these data points into your retrospective and saying, how can we improve our process? How can we improve the flow that we had? So again, not a very fun exercise to do when you're doing it with a pen or something like that, but having a tool to do it, actually important. And then, of course, at the end, we want to look at the iteration. How did we do on the iteration goals? Did we actually meet it? Doing a maybe story by story review. And how we're doing towards our higher level goals, about the PEI, how we're doing on the objectives, are we progressing towards that? Are we actually missing part of the plan? So all of these things can of course do that in an analog way, unless you're distributed or remote entirely. Sometimes even when I have teams that are sitting in the same location, I get them to do, I ask them to do, or give them the opportunity to do both, to have all the data for them, so they don't have to do all the metrics by hand. So with that, Mark, how can you help us here?
Yeah, I did. There's a lot there, but I think I really like. Let me just make myself presenter here real quick. I really like how you're talking about evaluating those goals and seeing how well we're doing. So let's go through a few additional details here. And for those of you who are not familiar with Targetprocess, we have this integrated dashboarding and these visualization tools that really help to in a lean way and in an efficient way really show some of that data. So maybe we'll deep dive into those, Rune. And if you have any questions along the way, please make sure you're filling them in the questions box there. We'll have a time at the end of this session as well to address any of those. So you started out by talking about capacity and allocations, and there's different ways we can look at capacity. If we're looking at it from a PI capacity standpoint, how much can we do? How many points do we want to do inside of a specific PI? But we've also have the ability to track individual teams and team members and making sure that they're not over allocated, because that's something that's very important. I used to be a Scrum Master, and I know how hard it can be for a team to be over allocated and feel like they're overworked. So we can look at things like the overall team load. We can track to see if they're okay. Or are they overloaded? So we can look at this and say, we know that it looks like that week of the month of June, because everybody's going on vacation, or maybe there's some issues that we have, it looks like we're overloaded. We've got way too much work, and we maybe don't have enough capacity that we need to go ahead and plan. So we can start to use this to level load the teams or level load the individual members to make sure that the teams, as they're putting in their planning and getting ready for a PI session, or maybe even planning out their team sprints, that we can help them to address some of those issues. And we can look at that by role, we can look at that by capacity versus allocation, as well as individual team members if we want to drill down and see the details of that. The team is going to work on refining their backlog, so we can look at a specific product backlog here. Again, they can drill down into that and make sure they understand the individual tasks and bugs that they have. If they don't have any, we can start to add them in there as they start to work on that work. We can also use this to story point the individual story. So if you want to open up the details on one of these stories, over here on the right-hand side, we have this little estimating work tool now, and we can go ahead and revote on this specific tool. And that allows the teams to go to this URL to their, on their mobile phone, or maybe on their computer, and instead of having everybody in the room, I think we've all been in that room where everybody looks at the expert and they watch him or her put their hands up. Each individual can go ahead and do their vote, and once all the individuals have voted, then we can actually go back, and the Scrum Master or the product owner can then decide to apply the 5, or do we want to have a discussion around that and maybe make a comment for that, or is there something else that we need to do before we go ahead and put that work on there. So being able to have a nice, easy, and fast way to do things like story pointing and estimating, can be very important and really help the team to manage the backlog that they're working on. When we plan out our sprints, this is looking at the things that don't have a team iteration yet or a team sprint. We can multi-select this and we can move multiple items over at once, or we can have individual work and we can talk about the details there as well. So this is allowing us to do that high-level sprint planning and let the team start to work on the work and easily add additional work in there if we want to go ahead and track that. From a tasking perspective, when we break that work down into our tasks, each member then can do their daily stand-up and walk through the task board here. And we also have the retrospectives at the end of this when we do our review, and we'll be able to do a retrospective, collect that feedback, and then even create our action items off of those retrospectives. So whether it be the daily stand-up, whether it be a Kanban board where we're doing a pull system, or a nice Scrum team here doing our sprint planning, the execution of that can be done very easily and smoothly, hopefully, inside of Targetprocess. Finally, a couple of dashboard views that we can see to actually allow us to track how well we're doing and really gauge if we're doing that in a proper way. The first one is, as Rune talked about, being able to take those objectives and break them down. So I've got program objectives, and we've broken them down into my team objectives here, so I can see the projection for what the team should be delivering. We can go to the business and we can actually ask them, what's the planned business value for this specific objective? And if they say we think it's going to be a 7, we'll go ahead and put the 7 in there, or we'll let them put that number in there. When we're done delivering, we can go back and we can actually collect the metrics on this. We can say, hey, we delivered these features or these stories that roll up into this objective. What do you think? Was it a 7 out of 7? And they said, you know what, you came close. There was one issue, so we'll call it a 6. So we can put our actual business value in there. We can call these committed or uncommitted if we're tracking the types of objectives that we want. What this allows us to do then is actually to measure and track our program predictability. So I can tell you over history how well the teams have been doing, which teams are our shining stars, which ones are our most improved. So we can look at this one and say, we know we had an issue. We use those retrospective action items to correct those issues, and now it looks like we're back on track. So using program predictability as a good way to help the teams to improve and track what they're doing in working with things like retrospectives and other things that the teams might do, is just a really healthy way for us to make sure that the teams are looking backwards to improve how they move forward. Finally, the last thing we can look at are different types of progress metrics. So this happens to be a dashboard with a few different views on it. I've got my progress metrics for my features on the left-hand side here. So we're tracking how well we're delivering on each of those features, and are we on track to go ahead and deliver those metrics. So this is the things that are in initial estimate, how many have been completed, how much effort is left on these, as well as the cumulative effort. So we can track overall for this feature the different details about what's going on for those. We're looking at our burn down chart to see if we're on track to meet our ideal line there and measure that, as well as a burn up chart view of that. I don't know if Rune has a thought on this, but I always had a debate with a fellow Scrum Master about should I use a burn down or a burn up chart. So I know there's value to both. I was a burn down guy, so when I was a Scrum Master, but I could see the value of doing both, and you get an option here. And then finally, if we're doing Kanban work, or we're going to look at our CFD model, we can track the work that the teams are doing and measure how well they're doing that in terms of cumulative flow as well. So this is just one example of a dashboard that you can create. You tailor these dashboards with the reports that are out of the box that you want to see, or very easily create your own reports in here and make it very visual for the team. We want to make it as easy as possible for the teams to see what's going on, and then let them start to work on the work that they need to do, so they can improve, and we can actually measure what's going on and see if there are anything else that we need to do in terms of tracking the details. So with that, I'll hand it back over to Rune, and we're going to finish up by talking about the delivery side, which is something really near and dear to my heart. I know in SAFe 5.0, they expanded a lot on the DevOps components of SAFe, and talking about continuous exploration and continuous delivery and continuous integration. So Rune, I'll hand it back over to you, and we'll find out more about the delivery pipeline.
Thank you, Mark. I just wanted to say that I've been in the burn up, burn down discussion a number of times, and the way it turned out in the end is the team is self-managing. They will find the best way to do. They will do some innovation around which one to pick.
Absolutely.
It's one of the battles.
Yep. Let the team choose.
Yeah, it really. And some of the other things I like, going into the holiday season, doing all of this planning is. Should you ever, as a team, look back how you did before? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's always good to look back. So last summer, when we had this holiday period, going on vacation, how did we actually do on the plan? Maybe our story points start to change nature a little bit because you have some people who are not there. So being able to go back and look at some of these data points and reflect over them after some time is really, really valuable. So I like that as well, because I know what happens to all the post-it notes afterwards, after PI is done. They go out the drain. Okay, so I'm happy, Mark, that this is a near and dear to you, but it's certainly a near and dear to me. I've worked with DevOps for quite some time and continues to deliver pipelines. So I've been looking forward to dive into this part. So from a SAFe perspective, our continuous delivery pipeline with the continuous exploration, integration, deployment, and release on demand is probably the place where you have most data points at all. So we talk about all of our workflows, how all of our development process is going, what about the data point from our process, the data point from our customers. I mean, there's just so many things to start on here. And if we go into the mindset of DevOps and talking about Colmer within SAFe, well, we can certainly focus in on the measurement part. So here it says measure the flow through the pipeline, implement full stack telemetry. I believe that somewhere in the course material it probably says measure everything. And that's really what you want to do. You want to measure everything because you may need this data later on. So whereas me, when I was working primarily as an RTE, as a Scrum Master, all the measurements on the process itself was actually my focus with the development teams. So again, you look at the entirety of the pipeline here. So what's my lead time getting from development and actually into the staging environment? But also, what about all these small steps in between? All about the potential delays we have in there? How long are our build times taking? Do we need some build acceleration in here? How's our automation of the test going as we add more test cases in? Are we making sure that we are not branching too often and actually merging things back? So don't have problem with that. How's the whole smoke test going, putting things into our deployment? What is happening when we switch things on and off with our toggles and so on? I mean, it's just a plethora of different data points that we would have no way of tracking in any manual way. So that's just one of it. Now, the other thing I started to get interested about a year and a half ago, when diving into product management as well, that's really about the product telemetry. So product telemetry, getting the data from the application in the field. How are people using it? How do we get the outcomes from these solutions that we're building? How are we knowing how many are signing up, how many are paying, how long time are people staying on a certain web page? Do they need help to get that? This is just gold worth to the product owner and to the product manager to get this. But you need to build it into your product. And secondly, you need a way to actually absorb it afterwards. So having a tool that can actually gather this information, it can help us understand when our customers really need to have some help. I try to measure it up towards when are we going to release, what is our optimal release window, these kind of things. Thousands of data points, and I'm really, really curious to see, Mark, how you have fixed this one.
Yeah, it's an interesting discussion. I was in retail sales when I started working, and I very much know the cyclical nature of some of these businesses, and I think it certainly can, it certainly is something that we need to be able to track and manage. So the other thing that you mentioned that really stuck out to me is really our ability to containerize and capture some of this data. So for instance, here I'm on the add button, the big green add button in Targetprocess now, and you can see all the different types of entities, and there's different places and ways that we can create and add these different objects. But if I look at something like, say, a build object, and normally we would automate this, and I have it automated in one of my DevOps demonstrations that we can actually show. In here now, I can actually assign features or user stories or bugs to this specific build, and then we can track the deployment of that. We can track which environments it's moving into and how long did it take us to move that work through. So because we have the containers to actually track and measure all of that data now, we can actually move through the solution very easily and really give us the types of DevOps metrics that we maybe would help us to improve as we move forward. So what I'm going to show here is a little bit some of the automation that we have. We can also manually track some of that as well. I just wanted to show that. So this is just a couple of dashboards that I'm going to walk through. The first one is a DevOps dashboard, which shows me on average, how long is it taking us to get into production? So when we start the process to when we finish, we're looking at 7.5 days. Well, if we want to deliver every 5 days or every week, we're just over that. So we have to kind of shorten that up if that's one of our goals. So we can drill into the details of that and find out exactly where those different releases are, which ones took longer, how come this one took 20 days. We can go in and look at the details of that and try to do some root cause analysis. We drill into the specific issues that came up with that. Maybe there was an environment issue or a hardware issue or whatever that may be, and then try to improve our process as we move forward so that we don't have to have that type of an issue going forward. When we look at those bills and track the packages of the work that we're actually delivering, we can look at that over time, we can look at that over PI, and really start to measure and try to improve upon that. And even things like bringing in incidents or ticketing, we can actually track how many help desk tickets came in over that time as well. So when we did a release, how many tickets did come in, how many of them were standard tickets, how many of them were urgent tickets or things that we needed to go ahead and address. Breaking out those packages, then once again into those builds, we can actually see that when did the deployment start, when did it stop, and how long did it take us. This is the container of that. We might be using a deployment tool, something like Jenkins or another different tool out there that we can actually bring in that data. We might be integrating with GitHub or GitLab or Bitbucket, and we can use those webhooks coming in to actually do things in here with our automation rules to track and exactly map to whatever pipeline or process you might be using. Once we go ahead and do that deployment, then I think it's time to start looking at our monitoring aspects of this. And this is a really exciting part for me in terms of our ability now to look at things like how long did it take us? So we have 2 incidents here that came in. How long did it take us? You see this one's in an acknowledged state. So we found the issue, they emailed or they sent a note to help desk, and then we acknowledged the issue. So now we can start to track how long over the last month or 2 did it take us to actually acknowledge that. We call that the mean time to acknowledge number. And then once we acknowledge it, how long did it take us to recover from that? So if it was a Sev1 issue or something that we needed to track, how long did it take us to recover? And can we get that recovery time down from 25 minutes down to a lower number perhaps? Or is there something else that we need to address in there? Which environments did we go into and how well did we track those different environments? So we can see now where we are, what's the downtime across those environments, and what's happening in terms of recovery and acknowledgement in there if we have multiple solutions or maybe failback solutions that we need to go ahead and do. So again, this gets a little bit more into the technical details of that and really linking into or syncing up with your monitoring tools. But from a product owner standpoint or a CIO or a CTO perspective, we can now bring that data into here. So everyone doesn't need access to all of your monitoring tools. We can actually capture that and very easily bring those measurements into one solution so you can then do any type of tracking that you want. And we have the ability to create and update your reporting so you can see the details that is really pertinent to your program increments, to your builds and your releases on demand that you're doing. Finally, the last part of this, and this is the part that really gets me excited about what SAFE is doing and what we're looking to do as well, is our ability to capture and track results. So as I look at my DevOps health assessment here, and this is a radar that you can pull right off of the Scaled Agile website, you can look at tracking things like how well do we measure, how well do we learn, and if you want, you can actually fill in this health assessment radar. We're pulling this one in from just a simple spreadsheet, but we can add the published view of that report right in here. So as we go through and once a quarter or once every 6 months evaluate how well we're doing, we can actually pull that health assessment in. And then we can track things like, are we getting better from a net promoter score perspective? So there might be dozens or hundreds, as Rune said, of data points to capture some of this data, but we can actually start to track this with just a minimal amount. If we can consolidate that data by month, or if we want to actually capture that in here, we can start to measure how well are we doing on net promoter scores. So we went from a 42 up to a 51. That's a good trajectory. Or 61. That's a great trajectory. Let's keep that going and keep those positive feedbacks coming as we measure and monitor that all the way through. Looking at things like utilization and our ability to track utilization as we do our deployments, and how well are we doing in terms of what we expect to what we're actually getting from a user standpoint. And any other types of measurements that you want to do, whether that be performance or other types of pieces, you can very easily tailor this to do that. A good example, and we'll finish up with this, is looking at something like market rhythms. So we were going through our session, I think it was last Friday, and Rune showed me this, and I'm like, I could very easily put this type of a market rhythm into Targetprocess. So I spent about an hour. I went ahead and loaded the data, which was the hardest part, because creating the report is very easy. So once I got a few data points into here, we're actually able to track now these market rhythms. So we can see that if we're B2B, that we actually have our peak here in August, and if we're deploying out to our customers or delivering to our customers, we know that the Christmas cycle or the holiday cycle here is going to be the busy time in terms of what we need to deploy. So if we're prepping for this and we're trying to get ready, we know that a couple of months before this, we need to make sure that we have all of our work done, so we can start to put our freezes in, make sure the team is ready to go, that we can ramp up if we're seasonal, and make sure that we have everything that we need to go ahead and hit these nice market rhythms. And then as these rhythms change, we can actually update this data, and we can look at it over time. We can look at this year over year. So there's some really great things that we can start to capture now. And the thing I really like about these types of reports is you can actually bring them in and store them inside of a tool like Targetprocess, and you use this to improve as you go on year over year. So with that, I think that was the end of my part of the presentation, and hopefully you like the format. Let me go ahead and go back to my question screen. And John, I'll just hand it over back to our moderator, John, and see if there are any questions that we can answer in line here. I know we have about 7 minutes or so to go ahead and finish up.
Yep. Thanks for that, Mark. We do have a couple of questions here, and I'll just state at the top here, you can get your questions in now. Like Mark said, we only have a few minutes, so if you do have any additional questions, we will be sending out a survey afterwards. Feel free to fill that out and put in any additional questions that you do have. We will do our best to reach back out to you after the presentation. But Mark, we did get a couple in during the presentation. Really great job, guys, by the way. So the first one here is, can the tool be integrated with existing ones in order to manage different levels with different tools?
Yeah, the short answer is absolutely. Yeah, we have integrations with Jira, with ADO, with other types of team tools. If you're using something like Jira that really isn't built to scale, we could certainly let you do your teams at that level or at a team tool level, and then bring in that at a program or portfolio level there. We also have integrations, as I mentioned, with the DevOps tools, and then we have an open API, as well as our ability to do open webhooks and other things as well. So absolutely.
All right, thank you for that, Mark. All right, I'm going to try to get through this one. Okay, so how do we align WSJF of epics in the portfolio Kanban and features in trains to manage situations where an epic may score high, but some of the features scoring low in one train impact the overall product?
Rune, you want to take a stab at that?
So usually I would say that we don't align those. So the way shortest job first is our prioritization method for sequencing our job for the maximum economic output. So the values we are giving it on the portfolio level doesn't necessarily need to track to the features. The features are really being handled by the product manager and maybe the business owners on that level, whereas there's some other people doing it on the portfolio level, and you don't necessarily need to track those across. So I hope that covers the answer.
All right, thank you for that. Another one, I think Yeah, for Mark, is the tool used for Safe Agile specifically for distributed teams, or can this tool be used for regular Agile or other methods as well?
Yeah, I think that's the really nice part about Targetprocess is it can be it's flexible. You can actually have multiple processes aligned in here. The one, the part I was showing you was the safe process, but I could have a separate process with separate terms and separate workflows that would be something for, say, a different process. If you're doing Scrum at scale or a different type of process in line with this, or something maybe more traditional, we could certainly have multiple in there as well. And just to tag on to the previous question as well, I think at an epic level, I like to track value, but maybe not all of that detail. So as we're looking at ROI or value at a high level and then break that down into the features, you should be able to derive the feature value from the epic value. And I think if you focus on that, you may have a good, at least a dotted line to what the epic should have.
Mm-hmm. Definitely makes a lot of sense there, and yep, I would echo that for sure. Okay, another one here. This is a question about test management assurance and assurance in the Scaled Agile framework. Do we plan in PI capacity testers, and what oh, sorry, this formatting on the question is a little tough to read. Sorry about that. Yeah, I'm actually going to skip that one. We'll look into that one and get back to you on that. Sorry about that. But last one that we have time for here. At a high level, how do you compare and contrast Targetprocess with other? I'll just say with other tools that are out there, other similar tools that are out there.
Yeah, so I mean, I think one of the biggest things is, Targetprocess has really invested in the last 3 or 4 years in our user interface and our reporting capabilities and our ability to be flexible. Some of the other tools that have been maybe in the market even a little bit longer, I'm familiar with a couple of them. They really don't have the ability to do some of the nice inline reporting and the very nice ways to do the dashboarding aspects of that. It's a little more clunky than others. So I would say that's one. And then if we look at some of the other, I mentioned some team tools and other things that just aren't built for scaling. We really have a sweet spot here, and we can do other methods. But if we look at our ability to scale, ability to do those collections and then roll up those metrics and display them in a nice cohesive way, I think it's I've been it's a lot of fun to go ahead and use something like Targetprocess because it allows you to, back to Rune's comment about tools, it allows you to simplify without having an onerous process or an onerous thing in there. You just get the lean reporting that you want, and you don't have to, there's not a lot of baggage around the outside of it.
Mm-hmm. Yep, definitely makes a lot of sense. And thank you, Mark, for that. And also thank you, Rune, for presenting. Great job, guys. That's going to be it for our time here for this webinar. Thank you, everyone who did come out. Again, you can see my contact info on the screen right now. You can shoot me an email if you have any additional questions. We'll also be emailing everyone who registered for the event with the recording as well as the slides from the event. You can get some more information there. But unless anyone has any last minute comments, that's going to be it. Thank you, everyone, for watching, and we'll be sure to see you at the next one.